Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'm Nick Fortugno, and I'm going to be leading this roundtable and talking a bit about Animal Crossing and my deeply ambivalent relationship to it. So I'm going to pull up some slides here, just making sure that I have the actual slideshow. There we go. And this talk is called Animal Crossing, or Why We Have Faith in Systems. And basically, just a little bit about me to start. I'm a game designer. I've been a game designer for 11 years. I teach game design and interactive narrative design. And I've done a bunch of these well-plays before. I'm not sure if any of you have ever seen any of them before, but just to kind of give you the warning up front, they tend to be kind of theoretical. I'm probably going to get into some philosophy here, or in this case, psychology. And that I'm often like approaching these things from like a media critic standpoint. So you should expect that here. And this is your warning up front that this is going to be it's going to be a talk with a lot of analysis in it and a lot of critique, because that's kind of how I think about it. My relationship with Animal Crossing is ambivalent, is the best way to put it. Like, I played it for a while, and I can't say I didn't enjoy it when I played it, but I actually found it a troubling game in certain ways. And I got really curious about it. And so when Drew, and thanks to Drew Davidson for, basically giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel, offered me the chance to do a well played at this Games for Change. This is the game I wanted to do, because I think we all recognize that something is happening with this game right now that's really incredible. It's become the really the game of this era. And so thinking about that is interesting. It's had enormous sales, and also, like, even the mainstream media is aware that this game is somehow emblematic of the time that we're living in, and it has like a kind of power around like what we're going through right now. There's a meaning to it that's unusual to, I think, games in history. We have this moment where this game is really at the center of what we're thinking about. So I think that the key question when thinking about Animal Crossing is just like, why Animal Crossing? Like, what is it about Animal Crossing that's making it the game for right now? Okay, so one answer is it could be the gameplay, right? Like, maybe the game is just fun in a very particular way that's going to make it work. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Animal Crossing, which I don't imagine anyone here is, but just to cover the base, Animal Crossing is a game in which narratively you basically become part of a new community. In this case, it's because there are a bunch of islands that you can get a house on, and then you can develop your house alongside the island with a number of other villagers on the island. And you essentially do this by doing tasks on the island. You can dig up fossils and other things, mine things from trees and from rocks. You can fish and hunt birds, hunt insects with a net, and you can gather shells on the shore. And essentially, this gives you resources to be able to like customize the island the way you want. You can like build it out in a number of ways by growing flowers or crafting furniture and then laying it out in landscape. And all of this becomes a sort of like growth of a community that you build over time, with this kind of personalization of your choice. And you do this through, like the primary interface is through a set of tools. And this is the place where the gameplay really kind of rubber hits the road. And it's really interesting because the choices that get made in Animal Crossing are, quite frankly, kind of bizarre. I can get a slingshot, right? And in a representational scheme, a slingshot is a very obvious object. It's something that shoots a rock at something. And while there are numerous things you could shoot a rock at, and while I was really excited to get the slingshot in Animal Crossing the first time, and I should pick a beat here to say this, I have played Animal Crossing before, but never deeply. This was the first time I ever played an Animal Crossing for hours. I was super excited to shoot a bird that sits on a sign, or to shoot a neighbor, or to just fire rocks at trees and see if I can knock fruit out of them. But no, the slingshot does one thing. Only one thing. It pops balloons so that gifts can drop from the sky. And all the tools effectively operate this way. They all have this kind of logic. And the most egregious is the vaulting pole to me, where I have a tool that's designed to make me vault, and its only use is to vault me over rivers, when actually I have cliffs that the vaulting pole, from all representational logic, would allow me to jump over. So there's a sense in this game that the game, the way I put it is, it lacks verbs. There's like no real chance for me to be creative as a player around the core functionality. The moment-to-moment interactions are all keys for locks. I have a tool to do one thing for one thing. And so that like logic is interesting to me. And it makes the game, for me, not that fun as a game, right? Like as a game player, I don't find it that interesting. But I think picking on that is unfair because that's not the point, right? And anybody who would really pick on Animal Crossing for that fact is sort of missing the point. Even The Economist, of all things, recognizes the game as a social simulator, right? That what we're really looking at from this game is a simulation of social activity. And you'll see this floating around as a genre, like a social simulation game. This is like the idea that like it's meant to reflect a certain kind of community practice, that I'm going to meet people, I'm going to have social relationships with those people, I'm going to engage in the kinds of friendly practices that I would see. And that's really what it's about. Everything else is an excuse for that. Okay, so leave gameplay aside, right? That's not why we're here. Maybe we're here because we get to personalize, right? Like we actually get to build our own island. And that's interesting because I actually can do that in a really robust way in Animal Crossing. And probably the most effective mechanical system in Animal Crossing is its personalization. I can basically do whatever I want with my house. And I have enormous possibilities of customizing my house. The outfit system is terrific, both with customized user-created outfits, but also kind of customizable outfits in a variety of directions. And they do a really good job allowing for diversity there. And so I actually can like really create a really broad variety of people. And far enough into the game, I can actually design the whole island. I actually have the ability to just like to reshape the entire landscape once I get many, many hours in and my resources are high enough. And so definitely, I think there's a collecting aspect of the game that really is the reward for the game. It's like creating the island I want becomes the primary motivator. But I think the problem with that as a gameplay function is that it's just really hard to do. It costs a lot of bells, the primary currency of the game, to really do any kind of customization. And it takes hours to earn those bells. And where it doesn't take bells, it takes miles. And I have to do tons of dopey little tasks to get to miles. So the grind that I have to go through to be able to customize the island the way I want to when we live in a Minecraft world is just ludicrously long. And so essentially, and good call, Allison, essentially, the question is like, if this is a game about personalization, like, why do I have to do so much work, right? Like, what is about this game that makes the personalization interesting to me and fun if all I really have to do is this grindy work of catching bugs and harvesting fish? Now, at this point, I'm gonna just kind of give credit where due. And thank Naomi Clark, for whom a lot of the next few slides are responsible. She's a game professor, assistant art professor at NYU, and a game designer. And in full disclosure, I've known Naomi for years and years and years. We've worked in like 100 capacities together. But I think Naomi is the smartest person in the room around these topics, and she's brought up a number of theoretical points. And I'm just gonna I'm basically just citing her for the next few slides. So keep that in mind as I go through the next couple of things I'm going to talk about. A few years ago, in conversations around social games, like games like Farmville and Cityville, Naomi was making arguments around a concept that she called the fantasy of labor. And this was a talk that she gave with Eric Zimmerman around the topic. And it was essentially about like what was appealing about a game like Farmville, where you basically just go and like dig up crops in this very reliable way. And it's like, there's no real creativity in what you're doing. It's very, very grindy. It always produces the same result. And like, why is that interesting? Doesn't that just get boring? And what Naomi argued was that, well, actually, what's interesting about Farmville is that it's reliable, and it speaks to this expectation of what labor can be, right? When I play Farmville, I don't deal with any of the politics. I don't deal with any of the biases of the world. I don't deal with the unfairness of like, even if we just take farming as an example of like big farming versus small farming and what is sustainable farming and like, what does the weather do to farming and all the chaos of the world, I get this very simple relationship that becomes very reliable. I do a certain amount of work and I get a certain amount of result, and I can always lean into that and know it's true. And there's something very satisfying about that idea that I get a constant and consistent reward for these things, right? And I would say, yeah, even turnips lean into that, because even though turnips are varied and the prices change over time, I know in the long run I'm going to make a profit on them. I know in the long run I'm going to come out ahead. And that, I think, is inherent to what goes on in Animal Crossing. Like every morning when I wake up, There are enough shells for me to harvest. There's enough fish for me to catch. I know I can go back to the rocks and get some more iron ore. I know that I'm going to, and if, even a simplistic view of Animal Crossing makes me recognize that there's a certain amount of bells I'm going to get every day. And that's like a critical point of Animal Crossing, is that I always know I'm going to be okay in terms of the amount of money I make if I just do the labor. And so there's a comfort to that, I think. There's a kind of fun to that in its comfort that I know that I'm going to get the results that I need for the work that I did. I'm not expecting to get it for free. I know the turnip prices are going to change and sometimes I'm going to lose money. I know that that I'm not sure exactly what shells I'm going to get, and I'm going to have to spend 15 minutes getting the shells. And it is a little bit onerous to spend 15 minutes getting the shells, but I also know I'm going to make 10,000 bells, about, right? And I'm going to do that just about every time. And sometimes I'm going to make 15, and sometimes I'm going to make 8, but I'm always going to make enough that I can get that bridge, that cheapest bridge, in 5 days. That's the fantasy of labor. Now, this is particularly poignant in Animal Crossing, and this is a video conversation that Naomi gave with Frank Lance at NYU that really sums this up. And I'm going to do this very, very quickly in shorthand because you should just watch Naomi's video. It's fascinating history on Animal Crossing and its relationship to the world, to the actual world. But Animal Crossing is actually speaking to a Japanese cultural mythology in a lot of the things that it does, and that cultural mythology has to do with this concept of a furusato village, right? Which is like basically like in Japan, from what I understand, and Naomi will be more of an expert on this for a lot of reasons, but like in Japan, there are these like kind of crosses between like colonial time spaces and Ren Fair spaces that look back on a history of Japan in which villages were sort of like these communal spaces where people harvested resources together, and they lived in a kind of collective debt structures where like loans would be taken out on behalf of the village. They'd be owned by the richest person in the village, and everyone would be getting their share of the loan. And so these concepts of Animal Crossing of like, I have a loan for my house and I get that loan as a way of like being part of a community are actually like an essential idea in a mythology around this kind of communal life. So Tom Nook in Animal Crossing is serving that purpose. He's giving you the loan as a way of making you part of a community, right? Like there's an idea that by having a debt to the community, I'm in the community. I have to stay in the community. And so there's a welcomeness to that debt. It's not a debt. You know, there's a lot of arguments about Animal Crossing and capitalism, that Nook is somehow like a loan shark or something, but that doesn't really make any sense because Nook never charges interest on the loans. There's never like a point at which Nook's going to break your kneecaps. It's more like the loan is a thing that you have to fulfill at some point. It's a responsibility you have to live up to. And that is an expectation. There's a fantasy of labor there. I know I'm going to get the bigger house, but I'll eventually be able to pay it back. I know that. And I know I'll pay it back over time, and it gives me a reason to be here. And all of the things I build in Animal Crossing have that relationship. If I build a bridge, I have to donate to the bridge. It's a collective effort, but I'm going to be the one doing most of the lifting. But I also recognize it's like a collective effort. If I want new houses to be formed, I have to put down an investment to have those neighbors come of 10,000 bells to get the house kit, even though it's not my house, right? It's this idea that like I'm contributing to the financial well-being of this place. And that's fascinating to me because it leads to the economy of Animal Crossing in a certain way. I will harvest a fossil that I could sell and just give it to the museum because I know I'll get another fossil. I'm not worried about making the money off of that fossil. I can just give it back to the community. I can spend 10,000 bells in someone else's house because I essentially know I'm going to get that money back at some point. So I don't mind burning a day's work to give a neighbor a house. It gives me this fantasy of community. And that at the heart, I think, is what Animal Crossing is about. It's like the things that make Animal Crossing interesting, and what I think so poignant about Animal Crossing right now is the idea that I'm part of a community. I can wander around and talk to people just whenever I want, and they'll give me a little conversation and give me a sense to have a sense of a relationship very quickly. I get little celebrations when we do things well. And I can have a little party with them. They'll remember my birthday or my fake birthday because I don't trust Nintendo with my real birthday, but like Like I can get a fake little birthday where they all remember that it's my birthday and they give me a little party. And maybe most importantly of all, I think in this time, I just see them. I just wander around and see them lifting weights or selling things or walking with a fishing pole. Like I get this choice of essentially like living in a world with other people. And I'm not going to show a lot of images of the contemporary world because A, I think that could be disturbing, and B, this is about fantasy. But just to remind everybody, that's not the world we live in right now. We don't live in a world where I can see people going about their normal lives. I don't live in a world where stopping in with a neighbor is something that's possible. And so in this, I get this magic of a world of social relationships that's safe. And that, I think, is the compelling thing about Animal Crossing right now, at least for me. It was this sense I didn't want to do anything else other than just walk around and see people wandering too. And there was a beauty to that I can't ignore. Now, if I'm going to take that, though, and I'm going to apply it, I'm sort of expanding on Naomi's idea of fantasy of labor to something I would call faith in systems. That essentially what Animal Crossing is about is a kind of faithfulness in systems that give me this pleasure knowing that those systems exist. And there's a bunch of them in Animal Crossing. Like my work is consistently rewarded. I know I'm always going to get the money I need in time. My debt doesn't increase. There's always more resources. My friends don't leave unless I want them to. They're always happy to be there. And nothing dies or goes away on its own. It's all present. It's all safe, you know? So you could say that Animal Crossing is a fantasy of faith and systems, right? It's a broad fantasy of faith and systems of community. And this is where my ambivalence comes in. And I want to be really clear, this is ambivalence. I'm not critiquing Animal Crossing on this exactly, but it's where my head goes when I hear things like this. This idea of faith and systems actually has a history, and it's not a history that's separate from like deep research. The thing that I tie it most closely to in my mind is the work of a psychologist, a social psychologist named Melvin Lerner, and the idea of what's called just world hypothesis. So Lerner is a professor of social psychology, and he's been researching this question for a while. And a lot of it comes out of a really simple experiment that if you do studies on rewards and you take two people and you choose one at random to receive a reward for a task, observers will more favorably value the person who got the reward than the person who didn't. And what's fascinating about this is it remains true even when we know the reward is random. So even if we are told explicitly that there was no reason why the person who got the award got it, the person who got the reward is a more favorable person. The winner wins and the loser loses because the world is just, right? Like that's the essential argument. Now, the just world hypothesis basically states that a just world is one in which actions and conditions have predictable and appropriate consequences, right? Where the world rewards me the way I should be rewarded. And actions, therefore, are tied to the choices I make, because if I make good choices, I should get good outcomes. And if I make bad choices, I should make bad outcomes. And this exists in the world in tons of ways. And maybe the most notable one that you might have seen is the concept of #blessed, which is this cultural concept that floats around in certain celebrity culture of the idea that like, oh, I won this award and I'm blessed. That's just world hypothesis. Like I have clearly done the right things because the world has given me the things that make me valuable. The idea that could be random, the idea that could be privileged, isn't really on the radar. It's that the world rewarded me for my things. That's interesting to me because that is faith in systems, right? So we can see Animal Crossing as a fantasy in some sense of a just world, right? It's a world in which all of those things are true, right? Like the world consistently rewards me for right behavior. And so I get to control the world I live in. And everything goes the way I want it to because I have done the right things. Now, once I got to this point, I started understanding my ambivalence around the game. It really has to do with the procedural rhetoric of the game. So how does this actually manifest in play, this idea of the just world? Well, part of it is that the tools have one use and I'm just supposed to put up with them, and that's the way it's supposed to work. So like I have to just kind of live with the fact that I can't hack my iPhone, I can't hack my slingshot. It shoots down presents, get used to it. Part of that lives in the environmental message of the game, which is a little bit bizarre. It's like that if I go to an island that no one lives on, I can pillage it to my heart's content because no one's ever going to come back there again. So if I cut down all the trees, that's okay, right? And that's problematic. Like the idea that nature only matters when people live there, or nature only, it's okay to exploit the things that no one sees, is a troubling rhetoric. The idea of what it means to play together, though, is at the heart of where all of these things go wrong for me. Part of it is that I'm troubled by the fact that the multiplayer interactions are so limited, especially in 2020, where I have so much potential to interact with people in game spaces. Like, I visit someone's island and basically all I can do is a fishing competition. It feels limited. It feels like the one tool I really would want to have. But even leaving that aside, that's just not the game I'm playing. There's something troubling about the core assumptions of this community. Do I really believe that Nook's loan to me is okay? I don't know anything about his economics, and someone mentioned in the chat before, like, Nook also sets the prices on everything. Do I actually feel like that's okay? Isn't Nook making money on this? Do loans exist in ways where the rich people don't get richer? I thought the whole point of loans was interest. But even more profound than that, was my experience I'm just going to describe quickly with one villager in Animal Crossing that you will recognize named Pietro. Pietro was one of the early villagers that came to my island. That might be true for everybody. And when Pietro came, like the people who saw the game around me were just like, what is that person doing here? Get rid of that person. Do not invite that person to your island. And it was like kind of fascinating to me. And on research, I found out that this is like kind of generally true. This is a Polygon article defending Pietro. Now, my distaste of Pietro came basically from, he has an aesthetic that I find loud, and its taste kind of irks me. I'm not a big fan of his fashion. He has a tendency to go off into these existential places. Where like it gets like really kind of troubling, and almost like profoundly sad. And that's like, I don't know, do I want to hang out with this character? Do I really want this character on my island? And in fact, I don't have to have this character on my island. And that's, I think, what's really interesting, is that Pietro can leave. And there was a point at which Pietro wanted to leave. Now, this is like actually true of most characters at Animal Crossing. At a certain point, the characters will mention they're thinking of going somewhere else. Now, this is an old concept in Animal Crossing. It actually goes back to much earlier versions of Animal Crossing that were more Tamagotchi-ish, to mention the concept in the chat that passed in the chat before. Like characters do have preferences and they do have wants, and you can give them things. But in Animal Crossing New Horizons, it doesn't really matter. In earlier Animal Crossings, characters would just leave if they were dissatisfied. But in New Horizons, they never leave. They'll always stay if you want them to stay. They just ask you, like, hey, I want to leave. Should I leave? And because they ask me, it really puts all the power in my hands about whether these people should stay on the island or not. And that's odd because it's a community. Like, should I really dictate who lives in my community that way? There was something very troubling to me when Pietro asked me to leave, because there was a part of me that was like, yeah, get off my island. I don't like your style. I don't like the way you talk. I don't really want you around, but you have a house here. Like, I see you fishing, right? Like, I know you live here. Do I have a right to do that? Now, this is something that's discussed in the game community, right? Like, there's whole videos you can find about how to make unwanted villagers leave. And that becomes like this odd relationship. Also notice Pietro at the center of the screen. It becomes this odd kind of relationship where do I get to manage the idea of who gets to live on my island when I don't run the island. They have, like, from the game's perspective and the narrative of the game, they have every right to live here that I do. So I didn't make Pietro leave. Like, I kept him, even though I don't want to talk to him, even though I don't want to hang out with him, because it's a community.